On October 29, 2025, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry met with the press to discuss an urgent crisis facing the state. Amid a federal government shutdown, the U.S. government announced they wouldn't be renewing SNAP benefits for the month of November. Considering Louisiana's status as the most impoverished state in the country, this had potentially disastrous ramifications, and action needed to be taken swiftly. While Landry began the press conference by addressing Louisiana's plan to prevent its citizens from going hungry, he had much more to say about another crisis facing the state. That crisis was centered around the most dominant institution in Louisiana, the LSU Tigers football team. $53 million. That's what LSU would have to pay its head football coach Brian Kelly to leave campus and never come back. Brian Kelly had only been at LSU for 3.5 years, but the entire state was done with him. On October 25, 2025, a blowout home loss to Texas A&M on national TV would move LSU to 5-3, a completely unacceptable start to the season. On the very next day, LSU announced that it had relieved head coach Brian Kelly of his duties. However, they fired Kelly without cause, meaning they would still have to pay him the remainder of his contract. This was the perfect opportunity for Jeff Landry to absolutely bury a political rival, LSU athletic director Scott Woodward.
No, I can tell you right now, Scott Woodward is not selecting the next coach. Hell, I'll let Donald Trump select it before I let him do it. We are not going down a failed path. And I wanted to tell you something. This is a pattern. The guy that's here now that wrote that contract cost Texas A&M $70-something million. Right now, we got a $53 million liability. We are not doing that again. And you know what? I believe that we're going to find a great coach. I mean, maybe we'll let President Trump pick it. He loves winners.
A state's governor and a state university's athletic director rarely find themselves in conflict. An AD usually doesn't wield the political power and influence of a state governor, and a governor's tenure isn't usually defined by a school's athletic program. But then there's the South, where a premier college football program is every bit of a political institution as the state legislature and the Supreme Court. Most in the South have multiple big-time programs vying for power. Texas is split between UT, A&M, and Tech. Alabama is Roll Tide versus War Eagle. In Florida, you got the Gators and the Seminoles. But what makes LSU different is that they're the only major university in a football-obsessed southern state. They quite literally have no in-state rivals. There isn't a diverse sports culture in Louisiana. The LSU Tigers are the culture. When a single institution has that kind of influence, the most powerful players in the state are going to vie for control over it. This has been happening in Louisiana for 100 years. In the 1920s and 30s, a state governor and senator, Huey Long, obsessed over LSU football. He wrote the school's fight song, Touchdown for LSU. He insisted on calling plays and would even speak to the team at halftime. He actually once had a coach fired for not letting him talk to the team during the break. Long would argue with the refs as if he were actually coaching or a part of the team. A century later, the connections between the governor's office and LSU football still run deep. Scott Woodward's hiring was a clear example of this. Typically, an athletic director is hired by and reports to the university president. The school board members have ultimate approval over any hire, but that's usually a formality. Except that's not really how things go down in Baton Rouge. In April of 2019, LSU convinced Woodward to leave the athletic director job at Texas A&M for the same role at LSU. School president F. King Alexander did not make the hire. Woodward was actually hired by the 14-member LSU Board of Supervisors. Alexander didn't even know the hire had taken place until the board summoned him and ordered him to fire incumbent AD Joe Oliva. Guess who those 14 all-powerful Board of Supervisors were appointed by? The Louisiana governor at the time, John Bell Edwards. John Bell Edwards and Scott Woodward were two peas in a pod. Edwards was a moderate Democrat and former military man who had a measured and stoic approach to everything he said and did. Woodward was a former lobbyist who endeared himself to politicians on both sides of the aisle before pursuing a career in college athletics. He liked to operate in the shadows and didn't make many public appearances. With a completely aligned leadership structure, Woodward's early tenure at LSU could not have gone any better. In his first year on campus, LSU won the national championship while fielding arguably the greatest team in college football history. After a disappointing 2 seasons following the title run, Woodward made his most important hire at LSU, bringing in Notre Dame's Brian Kelly to lead the football team with a 10-year, $95 million contract ahead of the 2022 season. The Kelly era started off extremely promising. In his first year on campus, LSU made the SEC title game. In his second, he produced a Heisman-winning quarterback in Jaden Daniels. But the honeymoon period didn't last long. Brian Kelly's football team did not improve in his third year on campus, and fans began turning on their team's coach. While Louisiana's most prestigious institution was losing momentum, Jeff Landry won the 2023 Louisiana governor election. Jeff Landry and Scott Woodward could not be more opposite. While Woodward can surely be described as politically moderate, Jeff Landry is as conservative as it gets. He's brash and he likes talking. He's pretty damn good at it too. Landry was skeptical of Woodward from the beginning. As athletic director of Texas A&M, Woodward comically overpaid Jimbo Fisher to coach the Aggie football team, only for Fisher to be fired after Woodward left and Texas A&M on the hook for his $70 million plus buyout. Landry was worried Kelly's contract would be equally toxic. Outside of football, Landry urged Woodward to bring back former basketball coach Will Wade, a man whom Woodward had personally fired a couple seasons earlier. Wade's replacement, Matt McMahon, had struggled mightily, but Woodward refused and brought back McMahon for another season. With a personality, political ideology, and vision for LSU athletics that all stood in stark contrast to Woodward's, Landry knew he needed to oust the AD in order to assert his influence on the program. With Woodward's stock at an all-time low as Kelly's massive buyout loomed, Landry pounced at the opportunity to make that happen. Landry couldn't outright fire Woodward. He needed the board of supervisors to do that, and the majority of the board members were still appointees of his predecessor, John Bell Edwards. The board serving under Edwards was responsible for bringing Woodward to campus, but even the most loyal Woodward supporter on that board would have a hard time defending the Brian Kelly buyout. Landry knew that if he could create enough chaos, he could force the board's hand. And chaos he did create. What commenced was a national tour of Jeff Landry hating on Scott Woodward. It started with that press conference. Then it went to the Pat McAfee show. He's a man of the people, so he did some local hits too. Landry was adamant about a few things. 1, Scott Woodward would not be hiring the next football coach. 2, Woodward is a reckless administrator who's been responsible for 2 of the biggest head coaching buyouts in college football history. And 3, the next head coach of LSU would have more of an incentive-based contract, protecting the school in case the hiring doesn't work out. At a school like LSU, if the AD isn't involved in the hiring of the head football coach, he really isn't the AD to begin with. The next day it became official. Scott Woodward was no longer the athletic director at LSU. Jeff Landry and the LSU Board of Supervisors said that new interim athletic director Rouge would have full discretion to pick the next football coach. But we all knew that was nonsense. If Osbury wanted his interim tag removed, he would be doing exactly what Jeff Landry would tell him to do. Just over a month later, on November 30th, Osbury hired the next LSU head football coach, Lane Kiffin. On the surface, it seemed like a great hire. As head coach of SEC rival Ole Miss, Kiffin led the program to back-to-back 10-win seasons for the first time in 60 years. At the time of his hiring, Ole Miss was 11-1 and all but guaranteed a berth in the college football playoff. But this wasn't the best hire for LSU. It was, however, the most on-brand hire. The most chaotic program in college football had hired the sport's most chaotic coach. Let's take a trip down memory lane. After serving as a backup quarterback at Fresno State under future number 1 overall NFL draft pick David Carr, Kiffin pursued a coaching career. As the son of legendary college and NFL defensive coordinator Monty Kiffin, coaching felt like Lane's destiny. He quickly rose the ranks. In 2005, at just 28 years old, Kiffin was hired by Pete Carroll to be USC's offensive coordinator. While expectations were sky high for a USC offense that featured reigning Heisman Trophy winner Matt Leinart, Kiffin took them to a whole new level. They averaged 50 points a game, led the nation in total offense, and produced another Heisman Trophy winner in Reggie Bush. Lane became the biggest hotshot coaching prospect in the game. With a reputation as a young offensive genius, a plethora of teams came calling him, offering head coaching positions. It wasn't just college teams. In 2007, Lane would accept a job coaching the Oakland Raiders. To make a long story short, Lane's tenure in Oakland was a total disaster. He went 5-15 before Raiders owner Al Davis fired him just 4 games into his second season. It was not an amicable breakup. While the NFL lost interest in the Lane Kiffin business, college programs still vied for his services. Ahead of the 2009 season, Kiffin accepted the head coaching job at Tennessee. The early returns on the Kiffin era at Tennessee looked very promising. After a 2-3 start, they blew out Georgia at home and played eventual national champion Alabama as tough as anyone could on the road. They won 4 of their last 5 games and finished 7-5. The future in Knoxville under Kiffin appeared very bright. But then Lane Kiffin bolted. After Pete Carroll left USC to become head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, Kiffin agreed to become his replacement, just 1 year into his tenure in Knoxville. Volunteer fans felt betrayed. Students rioted. Lane Kiffin said he wouldn't have left Tennessee for any job in the world other than USC, and to his credit, he tried to make USC work. But he couldn't get out of his own way. He built a reputation within the program as entitled and egotistical. He had a bad relationship with media. Coaches can get away with that when they win, but Kiffin wasn't really delivering on the field either. In 2013, just 5 games into his 4th season, Kiffin was famously fired at the airport after a blowout loss. His disastrous USC tenure forced him to reflect. Kiffin took a step back and became offensive coordinator under Nick Saban at Alabama, where he not only modernized Alabama's offense and helped extend their dynasty, but he also matured his coaching style under the guidance of Saban. Eager to return to the head coaching ranks, Kiffin agreed to become head coach at Florida Atlantic. His departure from Alabama was weird though. After agreeing to the Florida Atlantic job, he wanted to stay on Bama's staff for the national championship game against Clemson, but they mutually agreed he wouldn't coach it after the fact. Other notable former Saban assistants, such as Georgia head coach Kirby Smart and Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian, each stayed on as defensive and offensive coordinator respectively through the national championship before leaving for their head coaching jobs. Since accepting the Florida Atlantic job ahead of the 2017 season, Kiffin has been elite. He led FAU to their winningest 3-year stretch in school history. He then accepted the Ole Miss head coaching job and did the exact same thing there. In 2025, Lane's PR was at an all-time high. Ole Miss was one of the best and most exciting teams in the country. Kiffin was winning and genuinely beloved in Oxford, Mississippi. He appeared to finally have it figured out. And then Jeff Landry convinced him to leave it all for LSU. Unlike his previous departures, this one wasn't abrupt. It was speculated for the entire month LSU's head coaching job was vacant that Kiffin would be the guy. And you could tell Kiffin wanted it. He never shut it down. It felt like the attention he was getting served his ego, and to his credit, he kept winning. Ole Miss was dialed in. While the noise was loud on the outside, it seemed cool and calm on the inside. But then, when he announced he was leaving for LSU, the classic scenes of the Lane Kiffin soap opera were on full display. A hasty goodbye at the airport, showing immense gratitude to his former team while making it seem like LSU was the only job in the world he'd leave for. Meanwhile, he became public enemy number 1 in Oxford. Lane Kiffin is an elite coach, and there's no limit to what LSU will invest in their football team to give it the best chance to win. LSU will be good again, and there's no reason they can't be good quickly. Lane will likely start his tenure out on a high note. LSU will compete for SEC and national championships within a couple years. Optimism for the future of the program will be at a fever pitch. But we all know it won't last, because in the world of Louisiana politics and Lane Kiffin's soap opera, nothing ever lasts. After going on a national press tour blasting Scott Woodward for giving an albatross contract to Brian Kelly and swearing that no such contract would be given to the next head coach, Jeff Landry went ahead and signed off on giving virtually the same contract to the next head coach. That's because Landry doesn't actually care about the risk associated with hiring Lane. If Kiffin builds a successful program, Landry will look like a genius. But if the Kiffin era at LSU goes to shit, the next governor will likely be the one to have to clean up the mess. Jeff Landry will one day not be the governor. Whoever replaces him will rebuild LSU football in their own way based on their own interest. And Lane Kiffin will eventually do one of 2 things. He could fail and get run out of town, but that doesn't feel likely. What's more plausible is he'll succeed and leave town on his own. Lane's a damn good coach, but he is and always will be loyal to nobody except himself. Through thick and thin, he's never deviated from it. That doesn't mean he's a bad dude. By all accounts, he's a great mentor to his players and a great father to his children. But you know his character type. You know what you're dealing with. If I had an emotional investment in LSU football, I wonder how I'd feel about all this. After 6 straight disappointing seasons following the 2019 Natty, I'd be extremely hopeful about a proven winner like Kiffin leading the program back to its dominant ways. But I also know that the highs I could feel will inevitably be followed by heartbreak and frustration. This isn't a new world for LSU fans either. It's one they've been living in their whole lives. But within the chaos that is LSU, there's always bliss. They've won 3 national championships this century, tied for second most with Ohio State and only trailing Alabama. For a program that experiences so much turmoil at the top, the amount of success they've had is staggering. Jeff Landry and Lane Kiffin are both a ticking time bomb. Usually, a ticking time bomb is not a recipe for success. But LSU has gotten to the top in that environment before. There's no reason they can't do that again.